Coming up on NASCAR Video Magazine, our cover story is the Daytona Experience.
Oh, I won the Daytona 500! I won the Daytona 500!
We'll visit with Dale Earnhardt and see the man behind the Iron Mask.
We've won 4 championships. We want to win 5.
Benny Parsons will share war stories with Richard Petty and Dale Inman.
You scare yourself? No, it didn't scare me. It just took my breath. That's what I kind of did.
And we'll talk with racing legend Fred Lorenzen.
Then he got me going on the backstretch and banged me in the door, but it was all over with. But that was the biggest win of my life.
Hi everyone, I'm Benny Parsons, and welcome to the premiere edition of NASCAR Video Magazine. In every volume of this collector series, we're going to take you for a close-up look at the world of NASCAR in a way it's never been seen and can't be seen anywhere else.
We'll take you to the front row of the action and spend some personal time with the sport's biggest names, both past and present. We'll go behind the scenes to the shops to reveal the latest breakthroughs in the world's most competitive race cars. We'll meet the unsung heroes and key personalities of the sport. And NASCAR Video Magazine will capture timeless moments from the past you want to see over and over again. Our team of top journalists will be bringing the entire NASCAR lifestyle roaring right into your living room. Our premiere edition focuses on the entire Daytona experience. Dr. Jerry Punch takes you to the beach where sport was born. And I get to share some war stories with 7-time Daytona 500 winner Richard Petty and his crew chief Dale Inman about some of their most memorable moments on the famed Tri-Oval. Bob Jenkins will visit another legendary figure, Fred Lorenzen, the winner of the 1965 Daytona 500, who shares some personal details from his great career. And testing at Daytona is critical during the off-season, and we'll visit with drivers and crew chiefs to see what they're trying to learn when the track becomes a racing laboratory. And I'm going to visit with 1990 Winston Cup champion Dale Earnhardt. 1990 was a great season for Dale, but he tells us there was one thing missing, a win in the Daytona 500. We've got the inside story on how the Winston Cup teams pushed their engines to even greater limits with dyno technology. And we'll look beyond Winston Cup at the stars who have emerged from the Winston West Series. And finally, my old buddy DW, Darrell Waltrip, will show you that there are driving techniques used on the racetrack that you can apply to driving on the road.
Okay, let's get to it. Here's Dr. Jerry Punch, who reveals just where the name NASCAR came from, who won the first race, and a lot of other answers about how our sport got started.
On December 14, 1947, at the Streamline Hotel here in Daytona Beach, Florida, 35 men sat at a table and laid the groundwork for a national sanctioning body that would govern the sport of stock car racing. Chairing that meeting on that Sunday afternoon was Big Bill France, who had directed stock car races in the South during that year. In the next 3 days, a set of bylaws, rules, and guidelines were drawn up. Red Vode, a mechanic from Atlanta and one of those attending the meeting, has generally been given credit for naming the organization. And on February 21st, 1948, the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing was incorporated. France was elected president, and Cannonball Baker of Indianapolis was elected its first national commissioner. France declared the purpose of this association is to unite all stock car racing under one set of rules, to set up a benevolent fund and a national point standing system whereby only one stock car driver will be crowned national champion. The first strictly stock car race in NASCAR history was held on June 19, 1949 at Charlotte Speedway, a 3/4 mile dirt oval in Charlotte, North Carolina. The winner? was Jim Roper in a 1949 Lincoln. Race number 2 was held here on the sand of Daytona Beach. A crowd estimated at 5,000 was on hand to watch 28 cars compete. There were 21 cars still running after 160 miles, with Red Byron of Atlanta taking the win on an Oldsmobile number 22. Now, the course was actually a little more than 4 miles long. The cars ran 2 miles up the sand of the beach here, made a hard left-hand turn and ran 2 miles south on the asphalt of A1A. When did they start these races? Well, it wasn't according to television or even the sanctioning body. They started them according to tides. The tide would have to be out to run the race. In fact, the last race run here on the beach started late in the afternoon, around 3 or 3:30, because of a late afternoon high tide. On February 23rd, 1958, the final race was held here on this famed beach and road course. Paul Goldsmith won it in a Smoky Unit-prepared Pontiac. Some called it the end of an era for stock cars, and in a way it was. For only a few miles from here, a giant speedway was under construction that would change the face of stock car racing forever. Daytona International Speedway, the world center of racing, has hosted more competitive miles than any other facility of its era. The name Daytona is synonymous with motorized competition around the world. This facility has hosted some of the greatest drivers from the world of go-karts, sports cars, motorcycles, and stock cars. The Speedway opened in 1959, and many skeptics wondered about safety and just how competitive the stock cars would be on a 2.5-mile tri-oval. Well, the first Daytona 500 was run on February 22nd, 1959. Safety? There wasn't a single caution flag during that entire 500-mile event. Competition? Well, it took 61 hours and shots from 7 different cameras to finally determine that Lee Petty was the winner. The Daytona 500 is the race that every driver wants to win. Why? It's the richest and most prestigious stock car race in the world.
Oh, I won the Daytona 500. I won the Daytona 500.
Daryl, how long?
Wait. This is the Daytona 500, isn't it? Don't tell me it isn't. Thank God.
The dream that I had when I was down in this fourth corner taking those movies on that station wagon was to someday come here to get in this type of car, come here and win. And so by coming here and winning in '86, completed that cycle that I had as a little boy. And so this is the most important race right here in Daytona. I guess it always has been and always will be.
Coming up later, NASCAR Video will take you to visit with the man who has been here to Victory Lane at Daytona more than any other driver in stock car racing, the King, Richard Petty.
Thanks, Jerry. Did that beach course look like fun or what? You know, I think I'm a little bit too young or too old, I don't know which. If there was one driver that came close to the popularity of Richard Petty in the 60s, it would have to be fearless Freddie Lorenzen. Bob Jenkins found the Golden Boy alive and well and living near Chicago.
The year is 1961, and for the first time, Americans are exploring the new frontiers of outer space. NASCAR stock car racing is also entering a new era. With the opening of the Daytona International Speedway in 1959, along with the Atlanta Motor Speedway and the Charlotte Motor Speedway in 1960, there is a new emphasis on super speedway competition. Many of the drivers of the past era are starting to think of retirement, and there is a need for the sport to develop new heroes. From the unlikely spot of Elmhurst, Illinois, came a driver that would capture the imagination of stock car racing fans and change the image of the sport forever. That driver came to be known as the Golden Boy, Fred Lorenzen. Although he was a two-time USAC stock car champion in 1958 and 1959, very few NASCAR fans were familiar with his name when he moved south in 1960. Although his career was limited to only 158 starts, his impact on the memory of the fans is a lasting one. His pearl white Ford with the number 28 became the most famous race car of its era. Fred left the sport in 1972 and returned to the Chicago suburbs, where he lives quite comfortably with his wife of nearly 20 years, Nancy, and his 2 children, Chris, a high school senior, and Amanda, who is 13. His trophy room is a reminder of his glory days.
Fred, you've got over, what, 100 trophies in this room here. Which among them are the most important to you?
Oh, Bob, I guess I'd have to say the first one, drag racing in 1954, Wilmot Hills, won at a Ford, and I got beat the first in the spring, so I went back and put a big Caddy engine in it. And I set a record then, 97 miles an hour and a quarter. That was big stuff then. And then
Drag racing, so that's where you actually began.
started in drag racing.
And it was a Ford.
It was a Ford. I guess it was always Ford. And then when I got hooked up with Holman Moody in 1961, I'd have to say my next biggest win was, and probably the biggest and most memorable, was Darlington 1961, when I beat Turner with a lap to go.
Fred ran 7 races on the Grand National Circuit in 1956 with little success, but returned to run USAC in 58 and 59, and it was there he met a man that would change his life, Ralph Moody.
When I went to Milwaukee the first time to watch, there was a guy up there pulled in with a Ford, just a red Ford, and it just said CPHM, Charlotte, North Carolina, and that's all it said. And there was the name of the side was Ralph Moody. He won 2 or 3 of them. And I thought, geez, he comes in here late and he just hooks up at a tow bar and goes home. And he was beating the Mercury cars too, so that's why I picked up their name. And when we decided to build a Ford, and then this Moody gives me his card. He says, listen, you need some stuff someday, call me. So we bought it, but the Holman Moody engines were far superior of the engines built around here. Then $4,000 was a super money for an engine.
So where did a boy from the Chicago suburbs learn about NASCAR?
I think it was an incentive when I was living in Elmhurst, and growing up as a kid, I used to live in a tent in the summertime in the backyard, and I listened to this race down south called the Southern 500, and it was Curtis Turner, Joe Weatherly, and I said, boy, someday I want to go down south and race with these guys. So I raced locally around here, and when I picked up and got to know Ralph at Milwaukee, I decided I want to go down south. So in 1960, I built my own car and went and started in the south.
At the end of 60, things weren't looking good.
End of 1960, when I had come back with the car in July, my father said that somebody had come over and said that they needed this $5,000 I had borrowed from a used car dealer in Cicero, and he had to pay him off, so I had to sell everything and went back to the cement labor job, and that's when I got the call from Ralph Moody from Ford, and would you like to drive our car next year from 1961? So that's how it all started, really, but late 60s is when I got to go down south.
That call came on Christmas Eve?
Christmas Eve, right. That was the break in my life, but you got to have that certain break, and I think I got it because of when I was down in the 60s, and I guess Moody had seen me, he said, geez, if this kid had something behind him, then, you know, 50,000 behind your shop like Holman Moody's was something. Nowadays, you know, you have to have bigger than that. But I got the lucky break. There's a lot of, I think, good talent out there. They just have to get the break, and I was lucky enough to get it.
What do you remember about your first win in NASCAR?
First win was probably the biggest and most powerful win. That was at Darlington, the Rebel 300. And that was with Ralph being my tutor, and, you know, and I was nobody knew who I was or nothing, just that I was Holman Moody driver and just a Yankee from the South, but Ralph was tutoring me. I guess they thought maybe I'd do something. Well, we sat in the outside front row, and Moody would have me every day talking, watch this, watch that, do this, do that. And we got the car working good, but sometimes I need to be slowed down or, you know, sharpened up, and Moody said before the races, now watch Turner, he is sharp at this racetrack, he'll do anything to win. He was running for the Woods brothers. And Moody had told me before the race, if you ever get with Turner, watch him because he'll do anything to win it. And then he signaled me, and I'm trying to catch him, and he's pointing to his head, use your head. And I remember before the race, he said, when you pass Turner, make sure you get around him big and clean, because he's going to try to get you if it's by the checkered. So I went to pass him with 2 laps to go on the outside, and he moves up and pushes me right in the cement wall. So then I remembered what Moody said. He's putting on the board WHM, which means, what the heck's the matter? Use your head. So I remembered what he had pounded me, telling me to fake him out. So he said, we're coming off of turn 4 with a lap to go. I backed out of it to get a good slingshot at him, and then I faked to go high, and I went low and passed him underneath going into turn 1. So down the backstretch, I took the white flag, and I'm leading it. Down the backstretch, he tries to nail me into the fence. He couldn't catch me. So on the white flag, checkered flag, we won it. That was the first big win. Then he got me going on the backstretch. He banged me in the door, but it was all over with. But that was the biggest win in my life.
In 1963, Lorenzen became the first stock car driver to win over $100,000 in a single season. Lorenzen started 64 well, including a streak of 5 consecutive wins. But the next race, the World 600 at Charlotte, would be a race no stock car fan would forget.
I think Fireball was then my teammate, and he was running another car from home in Moody, a purple car, and I was in our car. I think we all qualified right up near the front. And the race is starting, and my mechanic saying, you know, we'll just sit back. We got 600 miles to go. And as the race starts and gets underway, there's 4 or 5 cars battling all around me for the lead, and we've got 590 miles to go. So Herb, my chief mechanic, says, Fred, just back off, lay back. So we decided to lay back. Then they're battling a lot in front of us again. So I thought, Jesus, it gives me the board to go and go around rather than stay in front of them. So I didn't want to have any trouble. And then once we got around them, I came up across the finish line, and the caution goes out, and that's when I saw smoke on the backstretch, and that's when Fireball, I guess, got crossed up going on the back, and his car caught fire, and he got burned. So that was a big change, probably the biggest change in my racing career. Fireball was like a god to me. That's one of the races I started racing. Was I wanted to go down and be able to race with him, but then to see him end up being my teammate, and then to get critically injured in a race car, it just sort of changed, I guess, my whole theory on racing. Racing to me was never the same, I guess, after that happened. It was just like, you know, the god was gone.
In 1965, Lorenzen won the Daytona 500 in a rain-shortened event to start the season.
Does that bother you now? You can claim a victory at Daytona, but yet it was a rain-shortened event.
Oh, yeah, I'd rather have it just go all the way, but anybody could have been in the front at the time. You know, it's just, we had decided to stay out because Herb had signaled me. It was my chief mechanic. He said, Fred, there's clouds coming. Something could happen. Stay out there. Because we got a couple hundred miles to go. We're over the halfway point. Stay. So I did, but I was running low on fuel. So we gambled it. If they wouldn't have called it, it'd have hurt us to pit under the green. We called it right. It was luck. You've got to have luck in racing, but you make your luck. The chief mechanic called the right shot, and it worked.
67, you begin the season and have success, but then later in the year you decide that that's it. Was there one specific reason? Was it the ulcer that you talked about earlier, or what exactly was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak?
I think the straw started when Fireball died. That was my God. When I was a kid, I followed him, and it never left me. In fact, when it happened, that happened in May, and then June we were testing, and July came, and we're running it for the firecracker. I think then it was 250 miler, and I stopped in the Valera Cleaners down there about 7 o'clock in the morning, get ready to the racetrack, and the lady, I had just called the hospital that morning and says, how's Fireball doing? He's doing good. Then when I go into the cleaners, the lady asked me, I said, I just talked to him last night, it wasn't. He's doing good, he's pulling through it. And then I go to get in the car, and the lady comes out of the cleaner. She says, Mr. Fred, I just heard the news that Fireball died. His lungs filled up, and that was it. And that sort of shocked me. In fact, when I got to the racetrack, I could hardly run. Ralph didn't want me to run. It was a qualifying race, but I said, no, I am okay. And I got in the race, and there was something happened coming out of turn 4, and I got sideways and got in the grass, and then I got hit in the side, and I severed 3 or 4 of my tendons in my fingers, and got cut in the foot and the leg and the chin, and I got messed up a little bit. My car demolished the car, but it just wasn't my day. But once that day had happened, I guess, I ended up in the hospital. Fireball died. I think that was a big change in my career. I think it's because Fireball and Turner and Weatherly are the reasons I really got into racing to start from when I was 10 years old. I wanted to be with them, and all of a sudden, my biggest life, it's like Santa Claus. You find out about Santa Claus when you're a little kid. The light went out, and once that happened, it changed my whole driving career.
Fred did attempt a comeback 3 years later, but it was cut short by a terrible crash while practicing in the Wood Brothers Mercury for the Southern 500. Since 1973, Lorenzen has been very successful in real estate sales in the Chicago area. But after talking with him, I think we may see Fred move south in the next few years in some racing capacity. Certainly was one of the most interesting drivers I've ever met, and it's easy to see why they call him the Golden Boy.
Fred Lorenzen, a quarter-century ago, the name was magic. I only got to race against Fred 2 or 3 times, but it was a huge thrill just to be on the same racetrack as Fred Lorenzen. Fred Lorenzen would never have won 12 races without testing. Back then it was both private test and tire test. But Freddie would never believe the testing that's going on today. The teams have been in Daytona for 2 months getting ready for the 1991 season. And teams approach testing in different ways. Let's go back to Jerry Punch with the story.
Leading up to Daytona Speed Weeks, there are 2 months of intensive testing here at the Speedway. For different teams, there are different goals.
We feel like we need to test about every racetrack prior to the race we're going to, because the tires are different, the temperature of the racetrack's different because you run in the first part of the year and then the last part, and that makes a big difference in how the car reacts to the hot asphalt against the cold asphalt. So we need to test basically every race. If we could do it the way we'd like to, that's what we would do.
Information is recorded, as well as chassis information and some engine variables, parameters, and we come back and analyze that data in order to organize what we think would be a better car than we could otherwise formulate for the different tracks.
We're down here just to try some different stuff. You know, we don't worry too much as far as speed's concerned. We're just down here to go through some different combinations of stuff, and that's it.
No, you're just fine-tuning your race car, you know, whether it be the engine or the handling, you know, and you just try to get the engine to run as fast as you possibly can, and the handling as good as you can, so it'll run the fastest around the racetrack.
We're with Dick Beatty, and Dick, testing at Daytona, testing anywhere for that matter, has been pretty much unleashed for a number of years, and then in the past few years it looks like we suddenly see NASCAR officials here. How long has it been since you guys started coming to testing?
Well, we started about 4 years ago when we went into the testing the way that it's done today, where all the Fords are here for 3 days, the Buicks, Chevrolets, and so forth. I try to have myself or either one of my employees here to answer any questions, and of course we lay out the templates so that they can put them on their cars to be sure they're right. Our main goal is to have these fellows to come back in February for Speed Week and not have to do any body work.
Now, how about the test session, since NASCAR has limited testing somewhat across the board for all teams through the years, the past year, to try to cut down on expense, which has been applauded by many of the teams. Do you have an official or someone there at each individual test?
No, we, in conjunction with the race tracks, report to Les Richter, and he keeps the scoreboard on the number of tests that they may make. I think it's been very good. It saved a lot of money. And of course, the Monday after the last race, Atlanta, until we open here in February for Speed Week, they can test anywhere they would like to do so.
For some drivers, it's a chance to sharpen skills. For others, it's not that exciting.
The more you run, the more natural it becomes. You know, you pick up little things here and there on the racetrack that help you drive around the racetrack better. And I think you absorb it, and a lot of times you don't even realize what you're picking up. But the more you run, the sharper your reflexes are.
1 lap or 2 laps out here by yourself at 190 is pretty monotonous, pretty boring. Not a whole lot of action goes on at that speed.
The main thing, I guess, is just finding out what will work and what won't, so that we can separate the two. And you know, you don't have enough time to do that when there's a lot of cars here at one time, and this gives us the opportunity to do that. So hopefully you achieve the goals that you're after, but you know, there's certain speeds that you would like to run, but it's not as much that in the test as what you want to find out about the chassis and the body and the engine components of the car.
You know, you come in here and you change, make a little change and you run 2 laps, because it's really hard to get the car wound up in the first lap, and you have to run 2 laps. So, you know, sometimes you find a little change you made help, then probably 80% of the time it don't help.
For the NASCAR Winston Cup teams, testing is a critical part of their overall racing program.
A team that understands just how important testing is the Richard Childress Dale Earnhardt team. They are the 1990 Winston Cup champions. And to tell you what kind of season they had, Earnhardt in 1990 earned over $3 million, the biggest season anyone has ever had in NASCAR history. The strength of their car was incredible. They led over 25% of all miles competed in 1990. But I saw a different Dale Earnhardt from his 3 previous championship seasons. While in New York for the Winston Cup Awards banquet, I got a chance to visit with Dale in the presidential suite of the palatial Waldorf Astoria and see a side of Dale you don't often see. The presidential suite, every U.S. president since Herbert Hoover has stayed in this suite. And now Dale Earnhardt from Kannapolis, North Carolina, is staying here. Is this one of the highlights of the 1990 championship season?
Well, yeah. It's part of making you feel like the champion when you're in New York, but it is. Coming to New York, it's the grand finale, so to speak. We've been doing press stuff all week and enjoying it and enjoying little nightlife and little nice restaurants, different restaurants, and we've had a good time.
At the awards banquet, they give you a check for almost $1,200,000. But is it really the money or the trophy? What is the most important part?
The title is important. Being the Winston Cup champion for 1990 is the most important thing for me, really. We work so hard for championships and races, as you know how hard they are to win, being an ex-driver. When you're doing it, all my thoughts are, being the Winston Cup champion. I sat down on the floor at the banquet last year looking up at Rusty, and we lost by 12 points. And it's fun. It's enjoyable to be in New York and, be here, but it's more fun if you're number one, and being the champion is where it's at. And we really worked hard to get here this year, and it's our 4th championship. That sort of set a precedence in modern-day racing, is to be 4-time Winston Cup champion. We've done the 4 championships in 10 years. So the championship, the title, the Winston Cup champion is the most important thing to me. All the other stuff that comes with it, the fun and the extra, and the money is just the cream on top.
You mentioned this is your 4th title. Was the first one more important? Is the second, the third? Which do you think is the most important of the 4?
Well, it's hard to say because each one seems to get better. Sweeter, more enjoyable, more exciting. They're harder to win for sure. The competition gets stronger. But I think all of them's been sweet and good. The first one was, but I was young and really didn't realize what I'd done or what the Winston Cup Championship was all about. And as we go along in racing, you learn more about it, and you learn how hard it is, and it gets more competitive as years goes. And to be, Winston Cup champion is pretty impressive to me, but your years are also running out to win the championship. So you better, this one's even sweeter because this is the last one we've won so far. And we're looking toward possibly 8, 10 more years in racing. And if we stay healthy and Richard Childress and the team stays as competitive as they are, we probably have shots at winning more. But we've won 4 in 10 years, and drivers have usually 10, 20 years in racing. And we know the chances of winning more in the future are going to be less than what we have had. So we cherish each one of them.
In 1990, phenomenal success. The best year Dale Earnhardt has ever had. But yet, I think I see a mellowing Dale Earnhardt. You just don't push, shove, and gouge like you did 4 or 5 years ago. Is it experience or age, or what's going on?
Well, I think it's a lot of the experience and a lot of the age, the time you've spent in a race and race cars and racing different drivers. You learn how to use your aggressiveness different. I think I've mellowed out some. I've learned a lot since 1980 as the first champion, and then, we were struggling through 84 to 85 to get back on our feet back on the ground with Childress, and we was a new team, and we was racing pretty aggressive along in there. And I think we've mellowed out to a point, but still the aggressive and the drive and the fire to want to win and go out and race hard is still there. And I don't give on the track as far as, racing somebody. I'll take what's mine, but maybe we are just a little more subdued or something.
Dale, you've won 4 Winston Cup championships. Pretty near $13 million in earnings. So
Obviously, you've got enough money to live comfortably on right now. So how do you get the motivation to win that 5th championship and the 6th? What's driving you to go on and win another one?
Well, to start off with, we've never won the Daytona 500, so we want to win there starting with. So that's going to be an all-out battle. We go out there and test and get ready for that. But we've won 4 championships. We want to win 5. That's what's next. Richard Petty's won 7.
Ah, we're chasing down the king, huh?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Richard Petty will always be the king, whether we win 7 championships or just 4. But still, that goal's there, the mark's there. He made the mark, and it's something to shoot at. So, like I said before, hopefully we've got several more years of good competitive racing left in us, as me and the team. I'm sure the team's going to be there, but if we can do it 1 or 2 more times through the next couple of years, we're going to be getting close.
People see Dale Earnhardt and they say, where in the world does this guy get the determination and the will to win that he has? Your dad, Ralph Earnhardt, also had that will and determination and independent streak. Did he teach you some of these things when you were a kid?
My dad was an independent person. He was strong, tough. He intimidated me all the time, but still he was my dad, and he'd do anything in the world for his kids. But he worked hard on and did most everything himself. Built engines, built cars, whatever. And I can remember he always paid for things as he went. He hated credit. He really never had credit. I first got married to my first wife. I went to Dad and I said, I want you to go to the bank and help me, sign for me. We're going to buy this house down the street here. He said, I don't think I can do it. I said, why? I said, you don't know anything about it. He said, that's just it. I don't have any credit. He could not sign. They wouldn't let him sign. He didn't have any collateral. He didn't owe for anything. Never had any credit.
When it's all over, do you sometimes think back and it's a shame that your father couldn't be here to see the success you've had?
Well, everyone, I'm sure, wishes their dad or their family could be with them that's not with them. And I've got a lot of great memories with him, racing with him and going bird hunting with him and doing things with him. And he taught me well, and I learned well. I wished I'd took it into when he was saying things and, really took it to heart instead of just listening and listen closer. But I've still got the basics and the basics of what he taught me, and it's got me a long way. I wish he was here today, yeah. And I'm sure he would be enjoying this championship, but he'd be enjoying so many other things that I do now that, I'd have big plans for him. He wouldn't have to worry about working for a living or anything. He could do what he and I wanted to do. It would be fun.
This is not the console from the Starship Enterprise. This is a dynamometer console at Hendrick Motorsports. Tony Reardon, dyno operator for Hendrick, has just run an engine up to 7,500 RPMs, measured the horsepower, cylinder temperature, air pressure, and many, many more things. Tony, take us a walk around the engine and tell us some what these gauges are, will you? Tony has run this engine 45 times today. Now, a run consists of 45 seconds, running the engine from 5,000 RPMs up to 7,500 RPMs and measuring the horsepower and about 25 other sensors, trying to find that last horsepower so his driver can win the Daytona 500. Tony, a couple of things. What's this big tube coming in the engine?
Well, first of all, Benny, the piece immediately above the carburetor is the air turbine, which is monitoring airflow through the engine. Above that is a sealed air box, which is drawing air from inside the workshop. The reason being for that is that we can keep a controlled temperature throughout the day. And secondly, we can also keep the contaminated exhaust gases inside the room getting inside the motor.
These sensors in the exhaust, they're very important, I'm sure. What kind of temperature does the exhaust run?
A motor, when it's running at its full potential, will be running around 1400 degrees Fahrenheit at 7,500 RPM.
Wow, can you keep the exhaust temperatures fairly even?
What we've got to work with there, Benny, is when we have a situation where we have a lot of variance there, we've got to work on the carburetor, the intake, and different ranges of spark plugs, jetting, etc. So we can get it within a given 30 to 40 degree spread between the cylinders.
Now that's how much trouble the Hendrick Motorsports team are going through for their drivers, but Jerry Punch called up some Ford drivers while they were in Daytona for a Ford test, and he talked about just how important a dyno is to their team effort.
We use dynamometers to develop power, the specific output of an engine in relation to its displacement, to evaluate friction, and that comes in big play with Winston Cup restricted racing, because the friction is one of the things that you can minimize, and the restrictor plate can't take that away from you. And we also use it to limit emissions on production cars, and with our new Anitrol arrangement, we actually develop engines for noise to limit both the vibration generated by an engine through its components, and also the airborne noise that at some point is required to be taken out through dampening or through sound deadening in a passenger car. In some cases where we've looked at the prospect of entering a series that we hadn't been in with Roush Racing, we've worked as long as 15 months to evaluate the things that the engine would need to do that would be different for the series it would be entering. So a dynamometer is as useful as a crescent wrench might have been to the IndyCar racers 50 years ago.
Joining me now, one of the best engine builders in the NASCAR Winston Cup Series, Beecher Hedlund, who is the chief engine builder for Junior Johnson's Budweiser Fords. And Beecher, in the old days we heard about red line 7,000. You couldn't really push them past 7,000 and they would come apart, but now that's not the case.
No, it's not, Jerry. We've made a whole lot of engine improvements over the years. 7,000 might be a restricted motor here at Daytona, but maybe more like 8,500 on a short track.
They say that a basketball for someone like Michael Jordan is like a dynamometer is to someone like you. You live with and sleep with that machine. What do you learn with a dyno, particularly with like a motor here at Daytona with a plate on it?
Well, we can learn a whole lot. The more horsepower you have, generally speaking, the faster you'll go. And sometimes that's not true on an unrestricted racetrack. But down here, I believe if you have 400 or 450 horsepower, you'll know the difference between the two.
Would it be hard to find the subtle changes, the incremental 2 or 3 horsepower changes without a dynamometer?
Oh, practically impossible. It's hard to find 2 or 3 horsepower on the racetrack because conditions change. You're not always under the same conditions. The weather may change, or the tires may have more laps on them. The driver might get a little better line. So if you have more horsepower, you'll know it.
Dyno technology, the key to success here in the Winston Cup Series.
In each NASCAR video magazine, we'll take a closer look at other types of racing that NASCAR sanctions. In this issue, Larry Nuber takes a closer look at the Winston West.
Hold off the challenge of Levante. Derek Cope wins the Daytona 500 in a remarkable upset here at the World Center of Racing. The 1990 Daytona 500 goes to Derek Cope.
For many, Derek's win was considered an upset, but looking at his racing roots, it's not so shocking after all. This Spanaway Washington driver is not the first West Coaster to do well in NASCAR, nor the only one in 1990.
Congratulations to Richard Charles Bound Jr., alias Chuck Bound, the 1990 Busch Grand National Series champion.
Stock cars with a NASCAR affiliation have raced on the West Coast since 1954. As a 22-year-old, one of 3 racing bounds, Chuck was Winston West champion back in 1976.
Well, you know, they're both NASCAR stock car racing, and they're both competitive, but I guess the biggest difference is the years that have gone by since the Winston West Championship. That was clear back in 1976 when I was only 22, and now here it is, 1990, and I'm 36. So, you know, it feels good to get another major championship, especially in the Busch Grand National Series. It's so competitive this day and age, so many different winners and all the tracks to go to, and the Winston Cup drivers competing so often. It's a lot of fun, and you know, it was a great year for Nescafe and Pontiac and Hensley Racing.
Another driver with impressive Winston West credentials making an impact is Chad Little.
It was a lot of good experience. It was, unfortunately, it wasn't as competitive as it needed to be for me to understand better what Winston Cup was going to be like. But the best part about it, it was 3 years of getting to drive Winston Cup cars. And even more importantly is I won a championship, and I finished runner-up the other 2 years, so I got a little bit of notoriety. I met some of the Winston Cup people. I met a man named Junie Donlevy who opened the door for me to come back here and run 8 races in 1989. And then that opened the door up for the Bullseye sponsorship this year, which in turn led to the Bullseye sponsorship next year with Tyson Foods. And we're going to run our first full season next year. So, you know, when you look at it that way, it really was a lot of help.
Many will be surprised to know that the first West Coast driver to score big in the Southeast was 61 Daytona winner Marvin Panch. And perhaps the grandest West Coast champion of all time is Californian Ray Elder. Ray won 6 Winston West championships. Several Western drivers have actually won combined West Cup races, but Ray's wins were the most impressive, defeating the regulars of the Petty Yarborough era twice at Riverside. It's impossible to ponder race cars with fenders without thinking about one of the grandest patriarchs this sport has ever known. The only driver who competed in NASCAR's first super speedway race ever, the 1950 Southern 500, and still active, Herschel McGriff. This 63-year-old former lumberman from Bridalveil, Oregon, returns next year to continue a career that began 43 years ago when Harry Truman was president. This year's Winston West title chase was the most exciting in history. 54-year-old veteran Bill Schmidt won the final race of the year, his only victory, to nose out this season's biggest winner, upstart Bill Sedgwick, by just a single point. The new age of Winston Cup racing is opening up more avenues for budding careers every year. The West Coast is now just as great a place to start as anywhere in America.
Can you imagine the disappointment that Bill Sedgwick must have felt when he lost the Winston West Championship by 1 point to Bill Smith? Up next, we're going to talk to a fellow who does know a great deal about winning. 200 times he's won Winston Cup races, 7 Daytona 500s, 7 Winston Cup championships. We can only be talking about one man, and that's Richard Petty. We had a chance to sit down and talk to Richard and his cousin, Dale Inman, who, by the way, he is the winningest Winston Cup crew chief in the history of NASCAR. We sat down with them in the Petty Museum in Level Cross, North Carolina, and shared some special Daytona memories. Richard, in 1959, when you drove in the Daytona International Speedway, now NASCAR racing started on dirt tracks, half miles, quarter miles, and paved racetracks, small racetracks. When you drove in and saw this 2.5-mile racetrack banked 31 degrees, do you remember your first thought?
I couldn't believe how big it was. I mean, it was bigger than all the rest of the racetracks we run put together. And at that time, there was nothing in the infield, just a few grandstands and stuff, and it made it look even bigger than it does today. So first time we seen it, we came through the tunnel, and you just popped out into the infield, and there it was, just as far as you could see was racetrack. So, it was just a completely different deal. I had just started racing. I'd been racing probably 6 months, and from that standpoint, it didn't make a whole lot of difference to me. I wasn't used to anyone, whether it was a short track or a big track, didn't make a whole lot of difference.
Racing in the last 30, 40 years has really come a long ways, and a lot of people ask why that racing has grown so much. And we talk about television, we talk about Winston, we talk about a lot of things, sponsors. But did the Daytona International Speedway, this huge racetrack that they started racing in 1959, was that one of the reasons, the turnaround in motorsports?
That was one of the reasons. They really got it started again. See, Darlington was built in 1950? 49 or 50, anyhow. And so that was the only super speedway. All right, then Daytona built in 59. Then in 60, Charlotte built, Atlanta built, you know what I mean? Then the first thing you knew, you had a bigger sport. You wasn't running at the fairgrounds or running at quarter-mile track on Saturday night. You sort of got away from that, and it put us in a bigger light and made us, took us from sandlot ball to major league ball.
How was the mechanical aspect working on the cars, that 20-mile-an-hour jump from 1963 to 64, and going with the Hemi from the wedge?
Well, we also got, in 64, we got the Hemi, but we also got a good-bodied car.
You all of a sudden, you're learning something about aerodynamics,
well, not
right?
really. It just so happened that the 64 Plymouth was a good race car, Benny. And so we go down there with the car, and we get the Hemi parts, and we put it all together. In fact, we have to weld on the block a little bit to get the gaskets and the head and everything to
That's
match
after
up.
we at the racetrack. We didn't go no testing then. There wasn't no testing.
But it wouldn't hold water, so we had to work on it down there. But and then naturally we build a car in NASCAR. We go through inspection, so it takes us about all day to go through inspection. So that afternoon we get out just before they close the track with the Hemi and the new 64 Plymouth, which was a lot better than the 63 because it had a fat back glass, and it had a good bubble. The 64 had a good bubble on the back window, and the nose was rounded and all that. It was a good race car, not to be built for a race car. So Richard goes out and runs, and he comes back in. We run about like we'd been running with the 63 and the wedge. So how was it? Well, he said, I let off. How much did you let off? Well, I let off a little in each corner. 2 mile an hour? Well, I don't know, so I let off a little bit. So we go to supper that night, we're quizzing him. So the next morning we go out, and get the car ready, and he goes out. He drops that thing off down the corner, wide open, probably running 20 mile an hour faster than he'd ever run. He come in, he said, we got to do something to this thing. He said, it ain't, because we set it just like we set the 63, and it wasn't working, it wasn't enough. So we had to reset the caster, we could turn the wheel, work on the seat, change the springs and stuff like that. But I guess eventually we got it where we could run wide open with it. And I think when we qualified down there, it was a real windy day, and it didn't seem to bother the car. So, but the 64 Plymouth, along with getting the Hemi, it was a good aerodynamically car. It was like a couple of mile an hour faster than the Dodge, and they was both built off of the same shell and everything, with the different grills and bumpers. It just made it a little bit better car. But he flat told us when he come in white as a ghost and couldn't turn loose the steering wheel. He said, we've got to do something.
You scare yourself?
No, it didn't scare me. It just took my breath. That's what kind of deal. You know what happened? At that time, we didn't have bucket seats. You still had bench seats in the car, and you took the right back off, and you just sat down in the deal. And the only thing we had in the car was a seatbelt. I go turn down in the corner and turn that thing, and all of a sudden I'm way over here, and I'm holding on to the car. And I can't turn it because I'm busy holding on. So we was running probably 168 or 69 mile an hour, but I'd go down there and I'd go just as far as I could, and then I'd have to let off and get back over where I could turn the thing. I told Dale, we worked on the caster to get it to turn easier, didn't have a power steering, all that kind of stuff. I said, man, that's the hardest turning thing I ever seen. I said, I guess it's running so fast, can't turn it. So we went out again one night, we got to talking. I said, we got to do something there. So we got to talking about something to hold me in the seat. So the next morning we come in, got a 2x4, and wrapped the blanket around it, put 2 bolts through it, and bolted it through the seat, the back of the seat. I went down there and turned that thing. You could turn it with one hand in because you're sitting up there, you didn't have to hold into the car. All of a sudden, I think the first lap I run in was wide open. First time I'd run a thing wide open, and we run like 73 or 74 mile an hour. And all it done was put a 2x4 in the car and picked up 4 mile an hour. I mean, but anyhow, I could drive the car. From then on, it was easy,
1976, the Daytona 500, the last lap. No, coming down for the white flag. David Pearson, the Purelator Mercury, and the STP Dodge, Richard Petty, get together coming off turn 4. Checker flag.
That was the checker flag, man.
That was it, wasn't it?
Yeah, man. We went. I led him across to the white flag, and we go up the back stretch, and he gets a good running start, and passes going into third corner. Well, when he goes in, he goes up a little bit, and I pull back down beside of him. So we beat and bash all through the corner, and then coming off of the fourth corner, I thought I had him cleared. I did, all except about that much. So I'm going to move out in front of him there, to keep him from coming on back. Well, he moves just as far as he can, and he has to turn in because the wall's out there. So he just does catch me on the left rear, on the right rear. And when it does, it gets me sideways, throws him into the fence. And then he spins down through there, and I get it like that, and then I get it straight. And I said, man, this is all right. About that time, that daggum thing wasn't on the ground. It was going straight, but it took off and went spun backwards spun the wrong way, spun up the track, hit the track with the nose and spun all except probably 20 yards to the racetrack. When it started spinning, I said, I'm all right. It's going to make it to the checker flag anyway. And the dadgum thing stopped, and I couldn't get it started. And David, he comes down, he spins, starts down pit road or starts toward the infield pit wall, and Joe Frazon comes by and hits him on the left front and straightens him up. Otherwise, he'd run head on in the wall. Straightens him up, he comes across the deal and gets the checker flag, and I'm sitting out there trying to get cranked up. But you run third.
I know
right?
it. I
Use a lap.
He ran second.
Yeah.
No, I finished third because
okay, but they took a lap away from us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I still finished in front of Benny. But anyhow, that was a spectacular situation.
The fan was in the radiator, and it wouldn't let it turn.
That's why it wouldn't start.
That's the reason it wouldn't
anyhow,
start.
I couldn't get that thing
And they
started.
penalized us a lap for pushing the car, but we run 199 laps before you did.
That's right. Do you want to end your career here at Petty Enterprises?
Yeah, I hope it's not close to that, but we're bringing in some people now that's taking. There's so much more that you have to do now, Benny. A crew chief just about can't be the full-time crew chief that he could be 5 years ago. So we got Robbie Loomis. When he go to the racetrack, he's more or less in charge of the car. You got somebody in charge of the motor. You got somebody that drives a truck now. 10, 15 years ago,
you did all those jobs.
I did everything except take care of the motor. I mean, I drove the truck to the race, we unloaded it, took care of the tires, Morris took care of the engine, changed tires, called most of the shots, loaded the truck up, drove it home. And now they're mad at the airplane's late.
Richard, in 1988, when you got out of the car, you never thought, I got to stop doing this. You've never once stepped out or got out of those wrecks and said, I got to stop doing this?
No, not really. I always tell Linda that, one of these days when this stops being fun, then, I'll get out of it. I won't do it no more. I was laying in the hospital there at Daytona after the 88 crash, looking at the ceiling and stuff, and I look up and she looks down and she said, "Are we having fun?" So, well, right at the moment, no, but by the time we got out of the hospital and I found out it was all right, I forgot all about it.
Who do you think 91 is going to be the toughest cat in the alley?
43.
43.
If I think any otherwise, I'm in trouble.
I tell you what, there's a lot of folks that would like to see that.
Not as much as this crowd around here, I'll tell you that. But it's really hard to say. Last year, the sun shined on Earnhardt the majority of the year. The year before, it shined on Rusty. The year before that, it was on Bill Elliott or somebody, So we really don't know. I guess that's what keeps us all coming back. And right now, nobody's done anything for next year. Nobody knows how good anybody's going to do. And that's the reason we're coming back. We feel like maybe the sun will shine on us this year.
And I'm sure a lot of you fans hope that the sun does shine on Richard Petty in 1991. Another fellow who hopes some sun shines on him in 91 is Darrell Waltrip, who has been the most popular driver in 1989, 1990. Darrell, a new team for you in 1991. How's things going?
It's going really well, Benny. This is an exciting venture for me. I've done this before, as you well remember, I guess, back in the 70s. And I've longed to get back in a situation where I actually owned the cars and drove them too. I don't know how long I can do that. I don't know if I'll be an owner and a driver for a long period of time, but it's something I wanted to do to get myself established as an owner so that someday I can get me a slick young driver to get in there and turn the wheel for me. But right now I'm having really the most fun I've had in a long time. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I'm here at the shop with the guys, putting a team together that I think is going to be one of the best teams in racing in 91 and put me back in victory circle.
Well, I'm not the slick young driver he's talking about, I'm telling you that. Darrell's going to join us this year, every NASCAR video magazine with driving tips. So, Darrell, I'm going to get out of the way. Go ahead with the video magazine driving tip.
All right, thank you, Benny. Most of us in today's society are worried about weight control and what we can do to keep the right amount of weight in the right places. Well, the same is true in successful race car driving. The tip I have for you today is how to avoid a condition called TTO, trailing throttle oversteer. Sounds pretty technical, but the theory is quite simple. Now, most of our racing is on ovals with wide sweeping turns, but it's a different ball game at Watkins Glen or Sears Point. On the oval, the car's weight stays even, especially on super speedways. On the road course, the car is constantly under different weight changes to the front and back because of hard braking and acceleration. Now then, what kind of traction should we expect from the front tires when most of the car's weight suddenly is transferred forward in an instance of sudden deacceleration? Well, the traction in the front tires will be better than the rear tires because there's more weight over them, right? It's a pretty simple concept. The front tires hold better under braking, the rear tires hold better under acceleration. Basically, it's just a matter of where the weight is, front or rear. Have you ever been traveling down an interstate? Of course you're doing the speed limit, and you spot your off-ramp too late and you ask yourself, what would Ironhead or Wild Bill do? Well, we know the answer to that. You're going for it. You check your mirror, it's clear, bonsai! Now you're in the middle of the ramp without the high banks of Daytona to help you, and you suddenly think to yourself, what kind of deductible do I have? Your self-preservation says, hold on here, jump off the gas, and get to the brakes fast. That's a normal reaction, but perhaps not the best one. Let me explain why making a sudden move off the throttle to the brake could put a couple of minor dings in your car, or even worse. What happens as you're moving onto the ramp is the car's weight is rolling to the side, not your normal driving condition, but not out of control yet because you still have traction from all four tires. But if you jump off the gas pedal too quickly, you unbalance the car. The weight shifts to the front, making those tires grab better. As the rear of the car becomes unweighted, the next thing you know, the taillights are now where the headlights used to be. So remember, the higher the speed, the more gentle and precise you have to be. Remember where your weight is.
I know exactly where my weight is, right there, thanks to my wife. Okay, the Daytona 500, a new team, you've won it once. Can this be the second win in the Daytona 500?
I really believe it can. We have a lot of things going for us. First of all, when we talk about this as a new team, you know, I have the same crew. Jeff Hammond is my crew chief. Our engines are being provided to us by Hendrick Motorsports with Randy Dorton and those people over there providing us with the engines. Those are the engines that really ran well last year at Daytona with Greg Sachs and us and Schrader. So we have a lot going for us, and we have the excitement of a new sponsor, a new paint job. It's still car number 17. It's still old DW. So I believe we got everything it takes to make everything rise to the top.
That would be something if a new team could win the Daytona 500 the first time out.
Plus, as the owner, I need the money.
That about wraps up the first volume of the NASCAR Video Magazine, the Collector Series. I hope you enjoyed it because we loved bringing you the King, the Golden Boy, and the new four-time Winston Cup champion all in one place. How can we top this? We're going to try as we bring you a new edition every other month, but we'd like your help.
Write to me at NASCAR Video, 1435 North Meridian Street, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46202, with your comments on what we did this edition, what you'd like to see in the future, more of today's heroes or racing legends, war stories, tech reports, or maybe classic moments from NASCAR's past.
Well, thanks for joining us on this premiere edition of the NASCAR Video Magazine. We'll see you in a couple of months with another edition. This is Benny Parsons. So long.